In this video, we're going to implement our next feature, which is to transfer money from one user to another. And this is how transfers work. So here we input the username of the user to which we want to transfer, and then here the amount. Okay, and so now we need to attach an event handler to this button here, and then we're going to take a look at our flowchart to see what we have to do. Okay, but let's start to take a look here at this element. So it is the button form, and then we will take our values from form input amount and form input to. So that's input transfer to and input transfer amount. And the button is button transfer. So as always, I already selected them here beforehand. So let's use button transfer dot add event listener, click, and then our function. And we will actually need our event here again, because just like before, we need to do event dot prevent default, because this one is also a form. And so without this, if we clicked here, then that would reload the page. So this here is pretty common to do when we're working with forms. So preventing the default behavior. Okay. All right. So let's create some data here based on the input data, and starting with the amount. So the amount to transfer is input transfer amount dot value. And then we need to convert it once again to a value, or to a number, actually. Okay. Oh, and now as I reload here, of course, we lose all this data. So this current data that we need. So now we will have to start to log in always here. And we could find a way around this, but yeah, let's just keep logging in whenever we have to check our code. So anyway, we have the amount, and then we also want to figure out the account to which we want to transfer. So const receiver account. And now the value is, of course, in input transfer to dot value. So that is the string that's going to be right here. So for example, if we want to transfer to Jessica Davis, that's going to be JD, right? However, that value alone, so that username alone, is not that helpful. It is only helpful when we use it to then actually find the account object to which we want to transfer. All right. And so for that, we once again use the find method. So that's accounts. So that's the array holding all the accounts. And then we have the current account, and we want to find account where the username is equal to this value that we put in here. All right. So to recap here, we are now looking for the account which has this value here. So that's going to be the username value that we input into that form, so to which we want to transfer. And so here we are looking for the account with the username which is equal to that inputted username. And then we select that from the account once more using the find method here. Okay, so we have this data. Let's just check if it is correct here by logging it all to the console. So also the receiver account. So this should be a comma. So I'm logging in as JS with this pin. And now let's say I transfer to Jessica Davis. That's JD, 100 euros. And now in the console, we indeed get 100 and the account with the username that I just inputted there. Great. So let's see what we have to do now. So what we will do is to add a negative movement to the current user and add a positive movement to the recipient. And that makes sense, right? So if I transfer 100 to someone, I should lose that 100 and the other person should receive that 100. Otherwise, we would just be creating new money, right? So we do that, and then we update the UI again. So we show again the movements, summary, and balance, because all of that will be affected by this transfer. Now, what's kind of missing here in this flowchart is that we also actually first need to check some stuff. So we need to check if the amount here is actually a positive number, and we also need to check if the current user, so Jonas right now, actually has enough money. So I should not be able to transfer 5,000 if I only have like 3,000 and something. Okay, so let's implement that check first. So as I just said, the amount needs to be greater than 0. Otherwise, we could do a negative transfer and basically transfer money to ourselves. So this needs to happen. And also, the balance of the current account needs to be greater or equal the amount that we're trying to transfer. Now, this balance value is actually not stored anywhere, right? So in the place where we calculate this balance, so that's right here, so calc display balance, all we do is to calculate it and then display it immediately on the user interface. But we do not save it anywhere. So let's actually change that. So besides only displaying it on the user interface, we also want to save it in the account. Now, how do we get access to that account? Well, we will do the same as we did previously with this function here, where now instead of the movements, we pass in the entire account. And so then we will be able to read the movements here from that account. And also we will be able to then create a new property on that account with the balance. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So we are changing it from movements, and so now we will be calling it with an entire account object. So here we need to do account.movements, and before we move on any further, let's call this correctly. So calc display balance should now only be called with the entire account object and not only with the movements array. Okay, so here it is. So now we take the movements from the account object and then we can add that. So we can say account.balance equals balance. And in fact, we can make this even better. We can store this value here immediately in account.balance. So let's do that. Account.balance here. And then we get that property here from account.balance as well. Great. And remember why all of this works. And we have some error here, but that doesn't matter. It's something unrelated. Now, anyway, let's remember why all of this works. So why we can set this property here on this account object that we receive, and it will then set that right here on these objects that we have here. Well, and the reason is that, once again, all of these different references do actually point to the exact same objects in the memory heap. Okay, so when we access this account1 object here, so down here in the login function, so right here, where we create this current account variable, this is of course not really a copy of the object itself. So just as we learned before, this is simply another variable which points to the same, so to the original object in the memory heap. Okay, so this current account object again is exactly one of these objects that we have right here. So one of the objects of the account array, right? They are the exact same object, they simply have different name. Here it is called account1, but then down here it might be called the current account. Okay, and then we use that current account to pass it into this called display balance function. And so then inside of that function, it will have even another name. So here it will be called ACC, but it's still the same object. Okay, it's still pointing to the same place in the heap, so in the memory. All right, and therefore setting the balance property here on ACC is exactly the same as setting it up there where we first defined the objects. Okay, and I will show you that in practice in a second. But now let's go here. And so this is where this error comes from, because we don't have any code block, and also because there is no second operand here. So anyway, let's go back to this condition here. So we already defined that the transfer can only happen if the amount is greater than 0. And now the second part is that the current user needs to have enough money to do this transfer. And so that means current account dot balance, which is the property that we just defined. All right. So we calculated the balance, and that needs to be at least equal to the amount that we're trying to transfer. Okay. Also, we should not be able to transfer money to our own account. So let's add that condition as well. So what we're trying to say is that the receiver account dot username must be equal from the current account dot username. All right. And here we have one equal too much. All right. And actually, we should also check if this receiver account actually exists. So if it doesn't exist, of course, it makes no sense to transfer money there. So we could add that here, like simply testing this. But instead, since we're already trying to read a property from that object here, we can use, once again, optional chaining, like this. And so then, if this object here doesn't exist, then immediately this here will become undefined, and the whole AND operation will fail. And so in this case, we don't need that. Let me just comment it out. And so now this should work. And so let's just log something to the console. So transfer valid. And now I will check all of these conditions here. So let's log in. And now I want to transfer again to Jessica Davis, and I will try to transfer 0. So we get 0, but we do not get transfer valid. So that means we didn't enter this if block here. Now let's try to transfer more than I have. And so this is also not valid, but now 500. And so all of these should now be true. So you see transfer valid. If I try something else, then again, nothing should happen. Oh, and actually it does happen. So indeed, the receiver account is undefined. And so this here will now be undefined. Oh, but I see what's happening. Because all that we are asking here is for this here to be different than the current account dot username. And so JS is of course different than undefined, and therefore this here is still true. And so in fact, we need to do this as well. So let's try this again. And so you see, of course, bugs like this can happen all the time. And so we find them, we fix them, and we move on. And of course, now we test with some wrong username there, and now nothing happens. Okay, so now the transfer is not valid. Now I'm also trying to transfer to myself, and so this is also not valid. But finally, to Jessica David, it will be valid. Okay, and so now here we can finally do what we intended to do all along. So these steps that we have here. So let's do that. So the current account dot movements So we will add one new movement, and so we're pushing here the amount, but negative. So the negative amount, and now on the receiver account, we will add a positive movement. Okay, and that's actually already it. That's the most important part of doing the transfer. So doing the transfer, and then we also want to update the user interface. So we could now copy this code here and paste it there as well, but that's not a good practice, as you already know. And so I will now refactor this code here all into one function. So let me grab this here, and this function will be called update UI, and it will also receive, of course, the current account. So let me write now the function here, update UI equals function, and I'm going to leave it empty for now. And so indeed here I need the current account now. Okay, so otherwise I could not call these three functions then using the account. But here I can call them whatever I want again. So let me just call them account. All right. So we refactored that functionality into its own function. And so now we can call this function anywhere that we want in our code, and it will then always perform these three tasks. Okay. So here I already called it update UI. Let me just write it here also as a comment. And now all I have to do is to paste it here as well. Great. So that should be working already. So let's transfer to Jessica Davis 500. And so now I should see one negative movement here, and this should also decrease by 500. And indeed, it did. So let's check now here the accounts variable, just to see if we actually get the balance. So indeed, we now have the balance property here. We also have the movements, and of course, it's going to contain the minus 500, right? So that's the money that we just transferred away to Jessica Davis. And indeed, it should also already be in Jessica Davis. So her latest movement is now indeed 500. So let's check it out also in the user interface. Now, before doing that, the final thing that we're going to do is to clean these input fields. But now, just to make sure, let's log in as Jessica Davis, and then we should get plus 500 here as the latest deposit. All right. Now, as I was saying, we need to clean out these inputs now. And that we will do no matter if the transfer was successful or not. So we can do that outside of this if statement. So just down here. Or actually, we can do it right here. Let's get rid of this console.log. And then input transfer amount equal, or actually dot value equal input transfer to equal the empty string. And with this, we should be finished. Let's try it one more time. This time, Jessica Davis will transfer something. And so we lost here the latest transfer, of course, because the page was reloaded. And this data, of course, then gets lost. So when our page loads, the information about the accounts, so the account data, will always be exactly what we have here in our code. Okay, so that's the reason why that data, that 500 transfer, is no longer here. But that doesn't matter. So let's transfer to Stephen Williams here, 1000. And we get an error here, assignment to constant variable HTML button. So at line 167, and oh, one more time, I forgot the value here. That's a very stupid mistake, right? Let's try that again. Stephen Thomas Williams, I believe. And now it worked. So all of our statistics here were updated. And indeed, now this field, or both of the fields, are empty. And now as we go to this account, oh, apparently it does not exist. Yeah, it is Stephen Thomas Williams. Yeah. So now we get this 1,000 deposit here that we just did previously. All right, awesome. So our application is coming more and more to life here.